Textbook models treat synaptic plasticity as occurring in an isolated vacuum, but physically, synapses are embedded within a dense, web-like extracellular matrix. These structures, known as perineuronal nets, or PNNs, are primarily composed of chondroitin sulfate proteoglycans. They physically wrap around the soma and dendrites of neurons, forming a structural scaffold. Since Camillo Golgi first described these structures in 1898, researchers viewed PNNs as static barriers. The assumption was that they existed solely to restrict adult neuroplasticity, stabilizing the brain by fixing long-term memories in place. This creates a mechanical conflict. If these nets are truly static barriers that block synaptic remodeling, it remains unclear how the brain achieves the massive synaptic reorganization and downscaling required every night during sleep. Perineuronal nets operate as dynamic components of the circadian clock. When this daily structural remodeling fails, the resulting rigidity becomes a primary driver of major psychiatric pathology. Memory consolidation during sleep requires two distinct mechanical processes: the systemic transfer of memory during slow-wave sleep and the pruning of excess synapses during REM sleep. Throughout wakefulness, the brain tags specific synapses formed during environmental interactions. These tags identify which connections should be strengthened and which are slated for elimination. REM sleep triggers a sharp increase in the firing of parvalbumin-positive inhibitory interneurons. This spike in activity is the necessary trigger for synaptic downscaling. However, PVB neurons are the specific cells most heavily encased by perineuronal nets, which naturally restrict their ability to remodel their connections. For sleep-dependent consolidation to occur, the brain must possess a mechanism to physically modify these PNN barriers on a nightly basis. This dual-axis graph tracks extracellular matrix diurnal rhythms. During active wakefulness, PNN density and LTP amplitude rise together, peaking near ZT20, where the brain ramps up CHSY1 synthesis to secure synapses. During sleep, structural density drops sharply at CT8, correlating with decreased LTP. This scheduled reduction in matrix density aligns precisely with the windows of broad synaptic downscaling across the cortex. This circadian degradation of the PNN is the mandatory mechanical step that permits the pruning and reorganization required for healthy memory processing. What is the specific biological mechanism that reduces these structural nets while the brain sleeps? Microglia act as the primary agents. Governed by their own molecular circadian clock, these cells monitor the synaptic environment and facilitate the necessary structural changes. During sleep, microglia secrete endogenous proteases, most notably an enzyme called cathepsin S. Cathepsin S actively cleaves the chondroitin sulfate proteoglycans, breaking the molecular linkages that maintain the structural integrity of the PNN. Matrix metalloproteases, particularly MMP9, also peak during sleep to provide secondary degradation of the matrix. This enzymatic activity shifts the excitatory and inhibitory balance of the network by reducing the inhibitory input onto the PVB interneurons. These microglial proteases act as a periodic release mechanism, temporarily easing structural constraints so that memory consolidation can proceed. Clinical pathology reveals what happens when this circadian remodeling of the extracellular matrix is disrupted. Schizophrenia is characterized by severe sleep spindle deficits and impaired memory consolidation, markers that often precede the onset of psychosis. In schizophrenia, researchers observe a profound reduction of PNNs and PVB neurons within the thalamic reticular nucleus. The normal diurnal rhythm of the matrix appears flattened and broken. This structural deficiency in the TRN directly impairs the brain's ability to generate the sleep spindles required for systemic memory transfer. The cognitive deficits in schizophrenia are linked to this structural failure of the ECM rhythm, which prevents the proper execution of memory consolidation during sleep. Post-traumatic stress disorder is defined neurobiologically by the failure to extinguish or downscale enhanced fear memories. The nightmares and sleep fragmentation associated with PTSD repeatedly disrupt the sleep architecture necessary for structural maintenance. Frequent waking prevents the brain from entering the protease-driven degradation window. The PNN density fails to reach the necessary trough required for remodeling. Without this periodic degradation, the fear memory engram remains structurally stabilized by the matrix and resists natural pruning. Pharmacological evidence supports this. The use of MMP inhibitors like doxycycline has been shown to disrupt the reconsolidation of fear memories in human subjects. Trauma disrupts sleep, and that disruption physically prevents the enzymatic matrix changes required to process and diminish the traumatic memory. Substance use disorder involves aberrant reward memory processing, often coupled with altered sleep chronotypes. The initial acquisition of a drug reward actually relies on MMP activity to degrade PNN components, allowing powerful new connections to form. Over time, prolonged drug use triggers a pathological upregulation of the PNN around the reward circuits. The density reaches a permanently hyper-elevated flatline. Breaking these entrenched drug memories experimentally requires the ablation of the PNNs within the corticostriatal. Addiction effectively builds a physical structural barrier around the reward engram, protecting it from the brain's natural pruning mechanisms. These findings shift the focus of psychiatric intervention away from the individual synapse and toward the broader structural environment. Most pharmacological approaches target neurotransmitter receptors. This new research focus targets the physical architecture that regulates those receptors. The ultimate goal is to modulate endogenous proteases like cathepsin S to artificially induce windows of plasticity during sleep. The extracellular matrix is a breathing, clock-driven architecture. Understanding its rhythm is the key to managing structural rigidity in the most intractable psychiatric disorders.